Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with my card for this, or cards, for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. So, I was raving about this mushroom stems wafer die that came out with Simon Says Stamps Just For You release? Yeah, that's what it's called. The March release. And I don't know what it is. Mushrooms are the thing this season with like everything. Like I've been seeing them, in stores with home decor, all the stuff. Anyway, love it. Have a million ideas. So this week's Color Throwdown Challenge gave me kind of just a stepping off point. I talk about this all the time. I like the Color Throwdown Challenge because it kind of gets me thinking most of the time in color combos that I just either wouldn't think of on my own, or like this time of year, I would not even think to do. It's blue, brown, and rust. And right now I'm like spring colors and rainbow everything. But I pulled out Faded Jeans Distress Ink, Ground Espresso Distress Ink, and Rusty Hinge Distress Ink. And I die cut the mushrooms from distressed watercolor paper. And then I stuck the die cut pieces just to my little Brutus Monroe stick and stamp mat. This is my kind of go-to mat now that I'll stick pieces that I'm either going to watercolor or do ink smushing like this, etc. You can see this mat is warped. It is not heat resistant. Now I know. I'm right now showing you using my heat tool. Trust me. I'm moving the tool fast. It's on the lower setting and I'm not letting anything heat up really. I was just using it to dry each of these layers. I'm using just a stamp storage sleeve. I'll have a link to these. I've shown this in a ton of videos. I love using this for ink smushing. I personally don't mind doing the traditional ink smushing, where you apply your ink, add the water, and then you press your cardstock face down into it so you never know what you're going to get. I'm totally fine with that. However, the bonus with doing it the way I'm showing is you do have more control. You can see where you're placing your little smushies and splatters and all the things. So that's what I'm doing here with just Faded Jeans Distress Ink. And then quickly, mostly drying it between each layer, because if you want more texture and more splatter effects, etc., you need each layer to be dry, because if you just leave it wet, it's all just going to meld together and you're not going to end up with the fabulous little bits of texture and splatter look, etc. So, you can also do this just on cardstock. It doesn't need to be die cut pieces. However, with a wafer die like this, all the pieces are on one wafer die. So it was easier to just die cut first and then do the method I'm doing here. Also, again, I like die cutting first. It's the same thing with when I like watercolor die cut pieces, etc. I like having things die cut first because then I can see where I'm putting, my ink, my watercolor, whatever it is. So I did the mushroom tops with that Faded Jeans and the smooshing and splattering. And then these pieces are the kind of the underneath portion of the top of the mushroom. So the top portions of them you're not going to see because the blue piece is a layer on top of that. So I took the Rusty Hinge Distress Ink and I used my little detail round blending brushes and just lightly blended the ink. I'm not going for perfection. I like the texture. I was going to leave it just like this, but then I was like, this also needs some ink smushing because once you start, you can't stop. Like the entire card turns into ink smushing. It's fun. Seriously. If you haven't done it, highly recommend it. It's one of the funnest little techniques. And every time I do it again, it's like, I want to do this on everything. Every card now must have ink smushing. Anyway, I did just a light little bit though with the Rusty Hinge. I wanted these to be a little bit lighter. And again, with this little stick and stamp mat, when I'm done all of this, I just take it to the sink, rinse it off. Whatever's left over from rinsing it off that's stuck on the mat, it's stuck there. Like I've got I think some permanent ink on here. I don't care. But distress inks especially, they will just rinse off with water. So when I'm done, I rinse it off. I let it air dry. Do not use soap on these or scrub them because you'll remove all that little sticky bit. Brutus Monroe does have a specific cleaner for the stick and stamp mat. I do have it. I've honestly never used it. I've just never felt the need to. I just rinse these off because, you guys have seen me. I have mats that I have in my Misty that I'll use for like stamp positioning. I have another one with the little stencil buddy that gets it's a filthy mess. And I don't care. Everything still works. That's great. So with the stems, I did kind of the same thing. I put the little stems on there. I used the ground espresso ink with a little detail blending brush again, only adding a little bit. Just, you know, kind of squiggling along, adding a little bit of color here, just keeping it soft. And then I'm also going to add the splattery a bit with the ink smooshing because it is life and it is wonderful. And there's something about it. I love that speckly splatter. You guys know I love the splatter. So anyway, added that to these. And this is where it really helps to either use like the storage sleeve like I'm using, or a piece of acetate, etc. Because you can see I'm just using like my finger to just press down like the smallest little areas, and I have way more control, you know, so I can just add little bits here and there. It's just perfect, like chef's kiss. So the underside of the mushrooms and the stems, setting those aside. The tops, I'm just going to add more because why not? We're going to add some like actual splatter here. So I'm going to use a bit of white gouache. The white gouache will, as it dries, you're not going to see the white splatter. It's going to absorb that faded jeans because I've got layers of that faded jeans smushed, distress ink smushed all onto those. So it'll absorb also because I only used a little bit of gouache and more water, and that's fine. It's subtle, but I can see it. That's all that matters. And then the other thing I'm going to use that you saw me shaking up there is some Winter Frost Distress Mica Stain. I don't use these as often as I should. I love the mica stains. They're beautiful. I have them all behind me. They're all arranged in rainbow order, so they're on display. It's kind of like for display only. I'm trying to get better at like actually removing them from the display and using them because they're beautiful. So these you have to shake up really, 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 really well because all that shimmery mica goodness settles to the bottom. So I shook it really, really well. I stuck some on the sleeve, and then I'm just using my fan brush with this as well to splatter. This is going to be really subtle. You can barely see it on camera. At the end, I'll show with my flashlight. Even then, it's subtle. In real life, though, the light catches it, and you can see these just pretty shimmery little bits. But they're not in your face like 99% of the cards I make. So, I did my little bits of splatter. Let everything dry. And then these are super duper easy to assemble. You just stick the stems on, and you can stick stems on however you want. I am generally, pretty OCD and do things like the way they were meant to. But this time I tilted them just a little bit, I'm only saying that because it's just not where my brain goes more often than not. But I did that with these. So I adhere the stems, and then you just stick the tops on, and that's it. They're done. Like cutest little mushrooms ever. So I would adhere them with craft tacky glue, and then I just stuck them under acrylic blocks just to hold them down while I would go on to adhere the rest of them. So I get all my little mushrooms assembled here, and they're all like speckly and textured, and just like I said, these were so much fun. Like I made an absolute mess, and then I'm gonna make more of a mess. However, another point to me is I remembered to put a glove on this time. I've shown this in other videos. Tim Holtz has shown this in videos. That's where I learned it. This is some like seam binding ribbon, and I keep it all just like crinkled up in an absolute mess because I like that texture. And then I put a glove on. In all the other videos, I don't think I have. It helps with this specific thing. It helps to have a glove because otherwise your hand is going to be unbelievably stained. So I started with spraying the ribbon with a little bit of water. And then I sprayed it with the Winter Frost mica stain, and then remembered, I don't want it because the mica stain is kind of turquoise color, and that's not what I was going for. I needed blue. So I pulled out the Faded Jeans Distress Oxide spray and added that, and I just went back and forth. Water, spray, meh, you just play with it. Do how you want to do it. You could use just the mica stains, you can use distress sprays, distress oxide sprays, any of them. I've done like kind of variations of these. I've been dyeing ribbon for years. That's what I used to do way back in the day, like 20 years ago, when we only had like 4 colors that grow grain ribbon to choose from, So anyway, I used my heat tool to dry it. It was already mostly dry at this point. Again, lower setting, and I also have asbestos fingers, so that kind of stuff doesn't bother me. But I crinkle it as I dry it too, just, again, to keep that texture, because that's what I love about it. It's just very thin ribbon, and I don't know, it's fun. So I did all of that and then set everything aside. And then I have these little craft tags. I've used these in many videos as well. I kind of obsessed with these little things. They'd come in a kit last year. Yeah, in one of Simon's kit. And then I've ordered like a few extra packs of them because they're only like a couple bucks for 10 or 20 tags. I'm not even sure. And I just love using them on my cards. So this time I took that ground espresso distress ink and did the ink smooshing onto these tags. And again, just like with the mushrooms, I'm layering. So add a bunch of, press in a bunch of the ink, dry it with my heat tool, repeat until I'm happy with it. Like I wasn't planning on doing, like I said, I wasn't planning on doing a whole lot of ink smooshing. It originally was just going to be the mushrooms, but I was having fun with it. And I was really liking how the ground espresso distress ink was looking on these tags. It just, the depth, I was like, ooh, yes. And then I went another step and took a blending brush and just blended around the edges of these tags. And it just, this would also look really nice on like a coffee themed card. Yes. There's just ground espresso is just, I was like really channeling like Tim Holtz and the grunge, his love of brown and all of that. I was like, this is the fun, this is what makes crafting and card making so much fun. I was loving it. So, and I'm not someone who does, grunge really and that sort of a thing. But when I do it a little bit or like dip my toes into it, I'm like, yes, this is so much fun. So set the tags aside. Now I have 2 more pieces of distress watercolor paper, and I'm going to put these in my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp them with one of the leaf edges background stamp. This was also part of the Just For You release. It has been justifiably super popular. The stamp is gorgeous. Love. So used the one leaf stamp on this and inked it up with that ground espresso distress ink. I did this on purpose. If you don't want to lose the stamp lines, like you want that to stay as is, use either archival ink. There's ground espresso archival ink, or just brown archival ink, or just anything that's not water reactive. And then, your stamp lines will stay as is. I didn't want them to though. So I used the distress ink, and then I used the rusty hinge, smushed that all over my little stamp storage sleeve, added a fair bit of water to it, sprayed that on there, and then smushing that all over. And this will reactivate all of what I stamped. So a lot of those areas, they're going to go blurry. It's going to pick up some of that ground espresso and kind of mix together. This is what I was aiming for. I was like, I want this, like, again, smushy, splattery, textured background. Love. It was fun. And I like how it just kind of faded in and out as the stamp lines kind of just did their thing. So fun. But like I said, if you don't want, like, depending on what you're making and you don't want your stamp lines to move, use a non-water reactive ink, like VersaFine Clair inks, archival inks, etc. So for my card bases, I'm using Nina Desert Storm cardstock that was cut to 4 1/4 by 11. And then I scored it at 5 1/2. So these will be top folding A2 note cards. And I'm going to stick those in my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp those with that leaf edges stamp and the ground espresso distress ink. So stamp that right onto the inside of both of these cards. And like I always say, when I stamp on the insides of my cards, it is done with the intention of being written over. I'll just use, a gel pen, that sort of a thing. I write whatever I put on the insides of my cards. It's always with the intention of it's going to get written over. That's the whole point. It's just there as extra embellishment so that the insides of the cards aren't naked. They can't be. It's not allowed. So for my sentiments, I cut down a couple sentiments from the Friendship Sentiment Strips pack. I just trim those down with my paper trimmer. And then I just used the distress inks and the little detailed blending brushes to add color to them. And I'm just using a scrap of the watercolor paper under my fingers so that I don't get fingerprints, because again, these are water reactive inks. And it's, if you've never done it, it's actually like if you like ink blend something, press your finger into it. 99% of the time, you're going to leave a fingerprint. It's just the nature of the ink. So I use the little scraps. Sometimes I'll use Post-it tape, that sort of thing, just to keep my fingers from getting all over. And also the fact that more often than not, I've got like ink on my fingers, so I'm not smearing things and making the mess that I usually make, you know? So I use the Rusty Hinge for the sentiments that'll go on the front. And then I use the Faded Jeans on the sentiments that I'm adhering to the insides of the cards. And then the backgrounds that I had stamped and smushed are dry. I trim these down a little bit just so they'll be slightly smaller than the card bases. So these are like 4 by 5 1/4. And I just use my little guillotine trimmer to trim those down. And then I adhered those to the card bases. And then, like I always do, I just stick them under my Misty for just a minute or two to let the glue set. And it just holds everything down nice and flat. These weren't too warped, considering how much like water and splatter added, but it just makes my life a little easier. So I stick them under there, let them dry while I work on, you know, other things. So my ribbon is also like completely dry. So I just threaded it through the tags and tied it in a bow. I wasn't sure at first how I was going to do it, but this is what I ended up deciding on. And it's kind of funny. One of the ribbons, it was all the same piece. I just cut it in half, but one stayed like extra crinkly, and then the other one just kind of smoothed out as I was tying it in a bow. I don't know. It's just funny how things like that happen. So I like them both. It just works, and you can see it. You can kind of see it in the video, but in real life, you can especially see the different like colors, since I use the 2 different sprays. And the shimmer is very subtle because I ended up adding, you know, so much water and the Distress Oxide spray, but there's just, again, just the teensiest hint of shimmer. And then my other little embellishment was the Privet Branch Wafer die from Simon. I die cut some Tonic gold vellum. For those that might remember, I've shown gold vellum in several videos, and usually like I'll die cut little butterflies, things like that from it. And the vellum I used to use was discontinued like a long time ago, and it's beautiful, you know, beautiful gold vellum that like everyone should have. I finally got my order with the Tonic gold vellum in it. Same stuff, exactly the same. I compared it. I am so happy. I am going to be getting extra packs of this because it's beautiful. So anyway, I'll have a link to that with all the supplies as always. So I die cut those Privet Branch die cuts from the gold vellum. I laid them on top of the tags, and then I adhered the mushrooms on top with just thin foam squares. So those are what's holding the vellum in place, because I didn't want any adhesive to show, because adhesive does show through vellum. But vellum is so lightweight that it's easy to like sandwich it between other things. So that's what the little mushrooms are doing. And then after I adhered the little mushrooms, I put Simon's Big Mama foam tape on the back of the tags, because this is nice and thin foam tape. So it'll give it a tiny bit of dimension, and it kind of makes up for like where the bump is at the top because of the ribbon. And it will also just adhere it really well to these card fronts. So I'd put the Big Mama foam tape on there, remove the backing, adhered the tags to my card fronts, and then the little sentiment strips, I added a couple of the little foam squares and a bit more liquid adhesive, and then that'll adhere the last little bit of that Privet Branch down, because it was just kind of flopping around there a little bit, and that'll get that adhered into place. Repeat with the second card, so a couple little foam squares on the end that kind of hangs over the tag, a little bit of craft tacky glue, press that in. As always, you could be done here, but of course I had bling that matched. I had some Studio Caudia San Marino pearls. It's just a pretty blue. Again, perfect. Really, it's more shocking when I can't find a color that matches, considering how much bling I own at this point. But yeah, figured out where I wanted to place them. I always kind of do one card, get my layout figured out with the bling, and then if I'm making multiples, I just repeat the process. It makes life so much easier. So, got the bling laid out, adhered that with craft tacky glue, that's going to finish off the cards. Like I said, I'm going to show with my flashlight. I try to show the shimmer of that mica stain splatter. It's not easy to catch on camera, but again, I'm looking at it right now in real life and it's beautiful. So I will have links below the video to my blog post, and in the blog post I'll link to the color throwdown challenge if you guys want to check it out. It's just for fun, anyone can play along, and I will of course have links to all of the supplies I used. You can check that out below if you are interested. It will also be picture links over on my blog, also linked directly below. Thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, you know, letting those robot overlords know that you guys are enjoying my content. Subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.